good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is wealth. Remember that May is Mental Health Month, and we have some great conversations for you on today. But right before we start, we want to introduce our great panel to you as always. We're going to start with the celebrity of the group who wants no accolades, but he is the urologist of the stars, who is once removed by being retired, but that really means nothing. That's our very own Dr. Terry Mason. Dr. Mason?
Hey, Dr. Mason, unmute yourself, my brother.
Still muted.
There you go.
Still muted.
So we're having some tech problems with Dr. Mason. Once he gets his mic together, we're going to come right to him. I'm going to move over to my colleague and co-worker. That's our very own Dr. Douglas Graham. Dr. Graham?
Well, thank you, Nikki. I'm a retired physician. I worked in the western suburbs for about 30 years. After that, I joined the congressman in his office in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, working on healthcare issues. It's really an honor and a treat to be here. I'm looking forward to this discussion and answering your questions if I can.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Dr. Mason, have you gotten your tech issues together? Can we hear you?
This is interesting.
Okay. So
You
while
still
he's
can't hear
working
me?
out,
Still
I
can't
can
hear
hear
me?
you now, Terry.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for and apologies to my technical issues, but I'm always here to be glad to be here with my esteemed colleagues and the congressman to impart whatever we can to help make your life better and to get you better informed about whatever it is that you have a question about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mason. To the doctor that keeps it real, she's always in the community making sure that everyone's on target. They call her Dr. 100. That's her name. Let's give it up for Dr. Maya Green.
Hello, Nikki. Thank you for having me. Congressman, thank you for having me. And to the community, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to learning with my esteemed colleagues here, and let's get into that community business.
Outstanding, outstanding. To the man who rose up on the scene out the emergency room with the hat on, but that's okay. We're going to accept it. The doctor with style. That's our very own Dr. Mike McGee. Dr. McGee?
Thank you so much, Nikki, and esteemed host. Glad to be a part of you guys. I'm an ER doc. I'm also the CEO of Premier Urgent Care, and I also wear some other hats, no pun intended. But I'm also the national chair for 100 Black Men of America's Violence Prevention Committee, and also the national chair for the American College of Emergency Physicians Violence Prevention Committee as well. So I do a lot of stuff with violence prevention for youth across the country. So glad to be here.
Outstanding, outstanding. I want to say hey to Lorenzo Burton that's here. He says, good evening, everyone. I want to say hey to Gwen Butler, who has dropped by. She's here with us on this evening. Hey, Gwen, and thanks for being here. To the guy who really has the passion to be Wolfgang Puck. That's our very own weight loss guru and internal medicine doctor, Dr. Tony Hansen.
All right. Thank you, Nikki. So happy to be here. It's a very special week. I'll put on my hat to celebrate my kids graduating from Wash U this week. I got two graduating on Friday for college and for graduate school. So excited about that. And as I sit in the sun, I want to remind everybody that although the sun is our friend, when you are sitting in a window, you don't get it blocks the UVB. The glass does. So you don't actually get that vitamin D you think you're going to get from the sun unless you're outside. So just keep that in mind. So if you're in your car, if you're in the home by the glass, that's not going to do it. You have to actually go outside to get that. Now, the sad thing is that the UVA that comes from the sun that can harm your skin, you actually will get that. How ironic is that? So although I'm in the sun to get some light, just be careful not to overconsume that light when you're sitting in the glass. So just wanted to start with that. Happy that we're going to talk a little bit about traumas and the things that people are experiencing for this mental health month. And so many of us are trying to recover from COVID, the losses we have in our life, and just living in a urban sprawl, which exposes us. So excited about that. And thank you for having this forum, Congressman. We always appreciate it.
Outstanding, outstanding. And to the man who makes this possible all the time, the one who is the vanguard on healthcare, the one who teaches us daily that health is wealth, that's our very own Congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District, Congressman Danny K. Davis.
Well, let me thank everybody for another week, and we are indeed looking forward to this evening. You know, before coming here, Nikki and I both attended an event at PCC Wellness Care. And of course, they were adding a pavilion. And my observance at that event is that it was so great because one, a visionary, Bob Urso, whom I've worked with for more than 20 years, had retired, and they had selected a young African American woman to be his successor. And she is now the CEO of PCC Wellness Care. And I thought that was significant because I can remember when I knew practically every African American administrator of any significant health activity in the country, because there weren't very many. As a matter of fact, the National Association of Health Service Executives was founded, NASI, as we called it. And there is still a tremendous need for health care managers and executives. So I want to take the opportunity to invite anybody that's not already booked in for next Monday, because we are going to have, and I say we, because the Miles Square Health Center is having a memorial luncheon for Dan Cantrell, who passed away a few months ago. And things were so tight at the time in terms of COVID that his family did not necessarily want to have a public event. So Henry Taylor and I conspired a little bit with each other and with the board at Miles Square, and we're going to memorialize Dan next week, Monday, 12 to 2. So anybody who might be hungry, and the food will be appropriate for anybody who have to eat lunch. It may not be necessarily to my liking, but it will be. And so anybody that's got the time, please come. And I remember when I met Dan Cantrell, the first day he came to Chicago to work, somebody told him he ought to come out and get to know me. And I was working at the time at the Martin Luther King Health Center. And so this guy came and we established a relationship that have lasted until now. I used to work for him eventually, and he used to work for me. So we had a lot of fun. But everybody's got mental health on our minds, especially after the tragic shootings in New York. And I happened to sit one seat down from the congressman who lives in Buffalo, from Buffalo, New York. And of course, he's one of the brightest members of Congress in terms of having concise, precise information. And you just like to hear him explain stuff because you feel like you're sitting in a classroom. And so I'm sure he'll have a lot to tell us tomorrow when we have our weekly meeting of the Ways and Means Committee. So let's get it on. I mean, another one of those guys say, let's get it on, dig into it, and see what we can come up with.
Outstanding, outstanding. I want to say hey to Audrey Jaycox, who's here with us. She says, good evening, everyone. So, Mike, I know you are pressed for time and have to get back to work, but I know you wanted to share some important information with us about the topic on this evening. And Dr. Hampton is going to assist you with those slides whenever you're ready.
Okay, I do want to address what Congressman Danny Davis just brought up about the shooting, unfortunate shooting in Buffalo. You know, a lot of people think that all shooters have mental health illnesses, but that is definitely a little bit of a misnomer, and a lot of times that's a political speaking point as well, to lump everybody into the box that, hey, these guys that were shooting each other had mental illness. What has been found out and what the literature shows is that when you have those isolated shootings where you have a lone person who's with a lone gun who's shooting multiple people for no apparent reason, they typically have mental health illnesses. When you see other young men, get into arguments and shooting each other, that's not the situation. When you see in all these mass shootings where you have groups fighting, then they bring out guns, that's just basically a lack of control, typically, and a lack of mental stability. These guys have anger management issues. They don't know how to resolve conflict, and they have guns, and so they shoot. And so I've had to deal with that in my talks that I give on firearm violence, because a lot of people think that, hey, everybody who's shooting have mental health illnesses. Now, there may be some underlying issues that they may stem from, long-term social determinants of health that affected them, where they've been exposed to violence a lot in their life. They may have some post-traumatic stress disorder, but they don't have schizophrenia. They don't have depression. They don't have these things that's telling them to do certain things that we see with these guys that go and shoot up a school full of young kids. Typically, those guys definitely have mental illnesses and definitely need to be on meds, which they aren't. So I just did want to clarify that. Anything you want to add on that, Dr. Hampton, or anyone else?
No, I think I completely agree that whenever we lump things into categories and we don't look at the individual and the individual situations, I think it diminishes everybody involved. And I just think that we want to take each incident and break it down. I'm all about root cause, right? What's the root cause of why things happen? And I agree that in our society, we tend to we look for the quick, easy answer. And that's not helping anybody. So, and if we did that more often, we will then have a way to help people if we understand the why. And life can be challenging. So what we want to do is coach and assist people when they struggle. And we can't do that if we lump them all into one big umbrella. So I agree 100%. And again, as we have this conversation, what's the root cause of why we do what we do? And we're all human, right? There's nobody on this panel or who's watching or listening who's hanging on a cross. We're not perfect. We're human, and we're allowed to get better and grow. So I really appreciate. I completely concur with your comments.
One other comment, and this is from someone who is an ER doc who see crisis all the time because they bring them to us, and it couldn't get a little controversial, right? So, crisis intervention team. I used to teach that at our hospital in Gary. I would go and do teachings to the police officers to tell them what to recognize when they see a crisis, instead of taking their guns out and shooting that guy who's out there perspiring. They're angry. They say, I want to kill somebody. They are having a psychotic event. And oftentimes you see where this guy who did the shooting, they use crisis intervention skills. They basically apprehended the guy. He didn't get killed. But if you look at a different race, it don't always come out that same way, right? They don't always, enlist the services of a crisis intervention team to take down a black man who may be having a psychotic event, he may get killed. And when in reality, he may have actually been doing passive suicide and may have had a toy gun because he's having a mental health crisis where he actually wants to die. And so, and we've had situations where kids have been subjected to that for having toy guns or whatever. And so crisis intervention teams, which is typically, 40 hours of training that teaches you to differentiate between someone who's having a psychotic break versus somebody who's doing criminal actions, needs to definitely be taught. And that should be something that should be taught, world round with all police and people from that aspect.
So you had some slides that you wanted to share. Let me pull up.
So I'll set the stage for that. And what you're about to see right now is, again, I just mentioned I'm an ER doc. When kids come in, right? When you have youth come in, we don't know what to give them. When they have, they say they want to hurt themselves, but they don't really want to hurt themselves. They don't meet the criteria to be admitted. We call the psychiatric, physician. Did the kid do anything? Did he try to take some medicines? Did he, try to shoot himself? Did he try to choke himself? If he didn't, almost 100%, most of the time we're going to be discharging that child because they don't necessarily meet the criteria, which is damn near you have to have done something and has to be a thought, an attempt, and not an actual thought. And so something that we did, you can show the next slide. This past last week of April was National Youth Violence Prevention Week. And so we went to multiple schools throughout Northwest Indiana and Chicago. And when I say we, this is POP, which is my nonprofit for Project Outreach Prevention on Youth Violence. We started out at the Juvenile Detention Center in Indiana. We also went to the alternate program at the Gary Police Department. We went to Kenwood Academy. We went to Joplin Elementary in Inglewood, and we went to North Lawndale on the west side. And ironically, when we got to North Lawndale, that was the day after that young 16-year-old kid that got shot in the head. And so the youth there were all in disarray. They were all sad. We came out. We talked about violence. We gave a prayer for the young man. We brought out a group from LA called For Trail, which performed. And we had an awesome time. And what we left them with was what you see on the screen, which from my perspective as an ER doc, I never had something to give the youth in terms of who they can call if they have a crisis that's not really happening in the ER today, but it can happen a week later or a month later. So these numbers on here are actually crisis intervention connections for them. They can always start out by calling 211, but then if you look on here, we have numbers for mental health crisis. We have numbers for bullying. We have numbers for domestic violence in shelters. We have drug abuse numbers. You have LGBT concerns, and you may be bullied from that. We have numbers for that. We also have young teen parents. So this is something that we were giving out to all the schools that we've went to. And we also have the same thing for Indiana. And I'm also making a national initiative that every 100 Black Man chapter across the country create something just like this for the city that they're in, so that our youth can have some source of resources when they have a true crisis, which, as you guys already know, there's a shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists. There's a bunch of kids now who's been shut in and have issues from COVID. And so we got to do our kids some more justice and give them the things they need so that they don't grow up having misdiagnoses and now they become an adult and they now truly suicidal or homicidal or doing those things that are not in their best interest. So I'll conclude with that. And thank you for the time.
And this, that's just Northwest Indiana.
Exactly. So we made one for both. And what we're going to be doing, we're going to do it, make it again and make it laminated and put a QR code on it so that kids in schools across Chicago and Northwest Indiana can actually share it with their colleagues who may need it. And the kids and the teachers and administrators loved it when we came to their schools and gave them these tools.
I just will comment real quick. I wanted to put this image back up. because there's this perception that the 4 young men on this image are thugs, right? Because of how they dress, how they appear. Now, I started our conversation by celebrating this hat, and behind me you see my oldest son who will be graduating from graduate. That's his degree behind me. If you saw my 2 boys walking around, they would look no different than this. That's
exactly
how they look. So,
and look, these young men, Dr. Hampton, are from LA. They're all brothers, and they touring with Chris Brown over in Dubai. They're about to be the next new addition, and they really can sing. And so they are our ambassadors for the organization called SAVE, which means Students Against Violence Everywhere. And there's a website that we tell youth to go to, that particular website, to learn how to be a leader in your school, to take up these challenges of preventing violence at your school and in whatever fashion they can do. And so that's also the thing that we did. We went to these different schools. We tried to get you to engage and to go to this website and learn how to be true ambassadors and prevent violence on their own. Because we can't do it every month. We can't go there, twice a year. The kids got to take the ownership. And that's what we're preaching with this.
Well, again, I'll comment that, listen, every time you treat these young men like they're thugs, like they mean nothing,
right,
you're traumatizing them. We can call it's micro trauma. Every time the police pulls them over and treats them like they don't mean anything, you're traumatizing them. Every time the teacher makes an inappropriate comment about them or assumes that they're not intellectually bright, you traumatize them. So we need to stop traumatizing our babies. And I really applaud you again for having these resources, because as a clinician, it's so important that we have resources so that we can help the clinicians do their work. Because I felt like you felt. I felt like my hands were tied when I was faced with some situations I wanted to help somebody with, but I didn't know what to do.
Right.
Thankfully, although we haven't done this specific thing in our health system with Advocate Aurora, we're asking questions. What's up with your transportation? What's up with are you having issues getting food? Are you depressed? Is there any abuse going on with your partner? And then when we click on a few things here and there are some resources. So we're starting to partner so that we all can work together, no matter what health system you're in, no matter what community program you're in, because if we don't address those things, then people won't be able to do the things we want them to do to be healthy. So I really applaud you. I applaud your efforts. And I really am thankful that we have people in the community that get it. And our job is to open our mouths up so other people can get it, because we're all here to serve each other so we can live our life purpose. So thank you so much for your time tonight and your sacrifice.
Let me ask this question. Of course, those of us who are elected people, one of the things that we do, and one of the things that we have to do, we're always trying to find ways to get money in order to do things. And there are some elected people who are not psychologists. They're not individuals necessarily with big hearts. They're not individuals. So we've reached the point where we do a lot of talking about evidence-based things that in order to convince some people, you got to have a lot of evidence that shows if you appropriate or put some money into this, there are going to be some positive results. How do we determine if programs are working?
That's a good question. And you're right. There are a bunch of people who applied, who didn't put the work in, who didn't put the thought process in. And also what happens is there's a bunch of people that's been applying that continues to get the money that other programs that are innovative and new don't tend to get. We're a prime example. I just got a grant from the Department of Justice in Indiana, and it's with another partner company organization, and it's for $950,000 over 3 years. And we just showed an evidence of best practice just now. One of the schools we went to is in Gary. It's the only school, so all the kids in Gary go to the same school. 2 days after spring break, they had 8 fights in 2 days. One fight was a brawl that was on video that people, my friends from the hospital, did you see that fight on video from Westside High School? I was like, oh my God, it's horrible. So I went in that next day, talked to all the kids, said, hey, I'm going to give you a challenge that I got from that SAVE program. It basically was a challenge to tell them, if you can decrease your fighting in between the groups, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, whoever has the greatest reduction in fights will receive $1,000 from Pop, a pizza party, and we're going to bring out a DJ. And with that, the junior class won. They had a 100% reduction in fights in 3 weeks. They went from 15 fights to no fights. And then the rest of the school decreased their whole fighting by 68%. And so that right there is evidence-based, although it's a small tidbit. And after that, they when the incentive was over, they started back having fights. And so I'm saying, guys, if you guys can do this for an incentive, you can do it if you want to do it. It's just got to be, we just got to show you the way. And that's what that SAVE program does. Because at the same time, Danny Davis can be at every event where something's happening. I can't be there. Dr. Hampton can't be there. So the kids got to take the ownership and the responsibility. And that's what we got to show them. And so those kind of programs that are working, we apply for the R3 grant. So we're waiting to hear back from that. So there are programs that people are applying to, but you got to have be a smart person and have the funding to hire a grant writer to get those grants, Congressman Davis, because they're very complex. There's a lot of criteria, and there's a lot of literature and intellectual property that got to go into that. And so it's not as hard as you think when people say, hey, go get a grant. Well, the grant is hard as heck. And I'm a doctor, and I got a master's in public health. And it's hard for me to figure it out. So I can imagine what the community organizations are going through. And then they get frustrated when they don't win, and then they give up.
Yeah, it is kind of heartbreaking to see people who express the desire to be helpful and don't necessarily meet the criteria in terms of securing the resources, and we don't want them to lose their desire. I mean, we want them, because I think what it really takes is a serious amount of engagement and involvement in an environment for individuals to determine what their behavior is going to be.
Exactly. And I'm sure all you guys have seen the latest article from the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that that firearms is now the #1 killer for all kids aged 1 to 19, not just black and brown, but all kids. And when I say firearms, I'm not just talking about homicide, but also suicide, as well as unintentional injuries. To me, that should wake up the whole country that now firearms have surpassed motor vehicle collisions, drug overdose, and cancer for our kids dying.
You know, Dr. McGee, I hope this is working still.
Yes.
Dr. McGee, first of all, let me thank you, because ever since I've known you from the time you were in medical school, you've been an avid advocate for the kinds of activities that you're doing now. And you've stayed on this course. And I, like Dr. Hampton, want to publicly thank you for everything that you do, the stuff that you tell us about and the stuff you don't, in terms of trying to provide some degree of redirection of this misdirected energy that our youth have. But I want to add another thing, because one of the things that you also mentioned, at least personally, is doing something that helps them with their self-esteem, helps with the self-esteem. And one of the things, and I'm just going to take a little bit of time to say this, Dr. Maya and everyone else, but one of the things that we always talk about, which is why we used to talk about these disparities and these differential outcomes. And, my thing was, well, why do these things exist? And they exist because they're supposed to. No one should be surprised that life expectancy or economic differentiations based on race exist because they're supposed to. And all you have to do is be a half a student of the history of this country and other countries of people where people of color have been are to see that that's the case. I'll give you this little synopsis. There was a movie that came out a few years ago, and the title of the movie was Dark Girls. And it was all about the issue about skin color as seen through the eyes of Black people against or toward ourselves. And the young lady, who must have been a teenager, opened up. She was a dark-skinned girl. And she said in the movie, I took my skin color from my father, and I hate him for it. So there is some pathology beyond what we talk about on the surface that we don't get to. That is also perhaps, and I don't have a peer-reviewed, randomized, controlled trial to say that's what it is. But behind a lot of this other stuff is our unresolved self-hatred. And until we put that squarely on the table, we are dancing around the root cause. And I'll end by saying this. This is why we see, and you know my granddaughter, Mike, you know, she's and thank you for all the work that you've done to help her and other students over there. But when we put more emphasis on buying weave than computers, that's a problem. And it's a problem that us have to take on face to face. And I'm going to end by saying this. What's happening is that what the implementation of a global white supremacy strategy has done, it is as done to our identity as the AIDS virus does to our immunity. It has taken away our ability to even know who or whose we are. And until we begin to deal with that, in addition to these other things, to help rebuild that degree of self-esteem and what have you, these problems will continue. And I'll stop.
You sure you didn't study psychiatry?
No, you know, Congressman Davis, I saw what happened in the 60s when we had an outward pride about who we were. We started wearing our hair long, and we were proud of our nappy hair. We were proud of our dark skin colors. We were proud to be able to support one another and to go into each other's business. And that's not the case. In our community now, it is a shame. When I drove the bus for the Chicago Transit Authority while I was in medical school, I learned how ethnically segregated the city of Chicago was, not just racially, ethnically. And every ethnic group had their own restaurants, their own economic, all their stores, all the things that they did, and they shopped among themselves. In the Black community, if a certain couple of ethnic groups decide not to work, we ain't got no Dunkin' Donuts to go to. We ain't got no gas to buy. We don't have. I'm just laying it out there because this is the truth. And until we get to that and really talk about the difference between what happened when we had 23 Black automobile dealerships, and now I don't think maybe just one, and 7 Black banks, and now just down to 1, and not just that, but why we will still be dancing around the periphery of what is really going on.
I think it makes a lot of sense because when I was a kid, I can recall our parents trying to prevent us from drinking coffee. They didn't want us to become addicted to the coffee aroma and taste. And they would tell you that coffee would make you Black.
Yeah.
they would tell you that coffee would make you black. And the
Which was
idea was to convince you
That's right.
not to drink it. And I mean, this business of self-analysis and self-determination must be a part of the movement away from certain kinds of activity. I mean, I don't see how it cannot be an active part of change if there's to be the change that we're seeking.
Well, I know Dr. Pete was trying to get in. So, and Doug, I understand that you have a comment as well. So go right ahead, Pete.
No, I was just going to say, when we were in my early part of my career, I worked with Project Brotherhood, and the principles of Project Brotherhood. One is that healthcare is a very broad term, and it does not limit itself to just the mere presence or absence of a disease process. And so if you are in a unhealthy mental, spiritual environment, that will yield either immediately or eventually into an unhealthy state. And you can call that depression, you can call that PTSD, you can call that coronary artery disease, you can call that heart attack, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's going to come out when we ignore the environmental ills that we expose ourselves to when we expose our children. Now, so partly what we did was we had this sort of broad interventions where going to see the doctor was, as we put that, equal on an equal plane as going to one of our manhood development groups. And we called manhood development groups, we had to rename it because it really was a rites of passage class. But when we would go apply for funding, they didn't know what rites of passage was. And so they'd be like, well, what does rites of passage got to do with cancer prevention or, HIV prevention? And, and our thing was, when you're at a place of privilege, you're able to say something like that, right? Because in your world, they're thinking we're just supposed to sit down and tell people that they're not supposed to have multiple sexual partners and they're supposed to, eat fresh fruit and vegetables. But these people are in survival mode. They're in survival mode. So to talk to them about you're only supposed to have one sexual partner, it's like, first, let's establish a sense of self-respect, self-esteem. Let's tell them who their people were. Let's tell them how much value they have. And when we could break that down and we said, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to have explicit, sessions that will include whatever you want, how to wear a condom, how to negotiate with your sexual partners, whatever. But in the beginning, we got to tell you, you are a king. You deserve, you have to respect yourself. And when we did that, many of the men would tell us, nobody has ever told me this. I ain't graduated from nothing. Nobody has ever told me I was worth it. And so then you say, oh, well, no wonder this guy's blood pressure is so high. No wonder he's in, he's been in prison so many times and so many gangs. So I'm saying this to say, I think we need to go back to, and Dr. Murray used to always tell us, if you have 100 Project Brotherhoods, if we don't get rid of the disparities that exist and the inequities that exist. So part of that is the social determinants of health. It means, cleaning up communities, giving people communities that they can be proud to live in. So those are the things that really, really matter. And I would say it does mean looking at our traditional structures and thinking creatively to say, maybe we don't need to sit kids in a classroom for 8 hours a day. Maybe we need to sit. Maybe one of those classes need to be self-esteem. Seriously, let's try something different to save our kids. Let's do something different. Who knows? If you have a self-esteem class, maybe the kids' math scores will go up. Maybe they won't be so prone to want to hurt each other based on a minor disagreement. And because Mike, I'm thinking to myself, I'm saying, you know, we had lots of challenges when I was kids. We had gangbang. We had all these things that these kids have. But it was like there was a lot on the line. You know, there was hope for us. And I think these kids don't see hope for them. So they can get themselves in a tussle and they can risk it all right now. You know, but we was, I mean, it was like the world was ours. So it was like, no, you know, like I got real problems with you right now, but I got places I gotta be at. I got people that's counting on me. And that sense of responsibility was put on me by the elders, right? And I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know how many conversations I have with young people. I don't even, you know, like I want to, I just don't interact with them enough to let them know, look, who's gonna be the next generation of doctors? If you screw up, who's gonna take care of me? You know?
No, Dr. Pete, you're 100% correct on all of that. And not only just self-esteem class, but conflict resolution. And something else that I've discovered as I've been working with 100 Black Men, and it's a research project that we're looking at right now. And I was looking at the effects of COVID upon youth violence. But what came out of that, and what I'd already thought about before, was when I go into a room with kids, and when we have these youth organizations that cater to kids, do we ever really assess their mental health or their mental wellness? Like, how do we know what kids, having lost a parent or a grandparent who raised them during COVID, that got them on the edge, where if you mention anything about my grandmother, I'm gonna knock the hell out of you because that's who raised me. And you don't know that my grandmother died and I couldn't bury her. So we don't even assess our kids, even with the organizations that deal with youth, 100 Black Men. I'm telling you, we got to change what we do. When we get a new year, we got another whole group of kids. Let our first session be a quick questionnaire survey. Where your head at, in so many words? Have you had somebody to die, you know, in the past year that you love, that you didn't get to talk about, or you didn't get any help from it? You know, are you sleeping well? Are you able to concentrate? Let's find out what they're going through. Then we can better give them the wraparound services they need, because otherwise it's a ticking time bomb that's just waiting to happen. And that's why even that 18-year-old who did what he did, he was a ticking time bomb that no one assessed why he was even doing it. Why did he hate Black people? So we're not even doing ourselves a good justice for our own being, for the youth or the adults in our world. Let's start out now. Any organization, you know, fraternities, church organizations, let's do a quick survey, quick 5-minute survey of your kids, answer them specific questions. And once you get that answer, you know what to do with it. There may be a kid who's ready to kill himself tomorrow that you can now take to a mental health crisis center and get them some help. And that's what's missing in all of our platforms.
You know, that reminds me of one of the sayings, and I think when I say this, and I've said it in different spaces, I'm thinking about, so a history about me. Before I was a doctor, I was a massage therapist. And then long before that, I was a teacher. I taught back in, well, I don't know what year it was, 1990s. Remember when they had behavior disorder school classes? And I taught at Augiel Gardens at a school called Carver Middle School. It's closed now. And I used to say, when I used to see different things happening, a child that's not embraced by his village will burn it down to feel his warmth. And when I say that, a lot of times we in our judgmental space will be like, what does that have to do with what's going on now in our community amongst our people? You know, Dr. Pete, the rite of passage, the embracing of the village has a lot to do with different outcomes and different understandings of our space in the village. And warmth has a lot to do with not my term of warmth, not my term of outside of the physical cold, but a sense of better coming out of that survival mode. You know, someone's against my grandmother. I have to do what I need to do to make this feel better, you know. And what do we do to change the narrative? I remember there's a couple of things that this also brings me to: violence towards each other, but violence towards ourselves too, to look for that warmth or that sense of betterment. I serve on the City of Chicago Task Force for Methamphetamine. And they were talking about, oh, how do we get Black men off meth? How do we do this? Because a lot of people don't know this, but there's an epidemic or I don't know what it is across the nation. Black men and meth, it's a thing. It's a thing, because a lot of times we think meth, we think other cultures, right? A couple of things. How did meth get in our neighborhoods? That's a whole different thing that Dr. Mason already, talked to. It's not like, oh, it just happened. No, it was an intentional thing. And the other thing is, when they were like, well, how do we, other people use meth responsibly and all this other stuff. And how do they're able to be functional users and all this other stuff. And I said, okay, when we talk about the environment we create for Black men, the environment we create for Black men, and I'll say it here, one time on the show, we had all this talk about poverty and stuff like that not being the issue, and people were not okay with poverty. And I was like, wait, let's stop. Poverty is a strategic form of oppression. Let's just stop all that. You know what I'm saying? And I'll say it again, the environment that's created. I was like, they were like, well, why don't we just show them how to use meth like normal people and other people? I was like, what? And get back to their normal. I was like, so come off meth to get back to the normal that we created, that they are trying to escape. They are trying to feel that warmth. We got to, and then when they were talking about rap, we like, oh, they shouldn't talk about this and stuff like that. But, where are the talks, and not only the talks, Dr. Mason said it last Monday, where are the actions? And the more you say it, thank you, Dr. Mason, thank you, Dr. Pete, the more you all say it, the more I'm seeing our community rise up and look for that action to change these narratives, not just talk about how they shouldn't be doing it in the narrative. How can they return to the narrative we've created for them, to do things to change the narrative, do something about it, instead of like talk. I think when we, going back to when we first, and we're going to see it, you're going to see all these news things come out and talk about what happened and all this other stuff. They going, we talked about it in COVID. I was like, okay, everybody gonna be shocked, even though this has been happening since, our people landed on this, on this country. It's been happening. We're gonna get shocked, blah, blah, blah. We're gonna pay white institutions to study the Black problems. We're gonna do all this stuff and never get to action of changing what that looks like in our community. And Dr. Mason, I think you hit on it, that we gotta talk about when our community makes an effort to own those businesses and things like that. We cannot let other people burn it down and justify why they did it. We have to hold the community, because we telling people, go out there and start those businesses and stuff like that. Historically, what's going to happen, and that's, we got to talk about it, is we also then have to protect our business owners, protect our leaders. We can't be like, because if we make that move, Martin Luther King, I said Martin Luther King had the same outcome as Malcolm X. So you don't tell me not to speak up. Don't tell me, And so we have to be protective of our leaders, of our business owners. We have to do it, but we have to set anticipation of how we're going to protect our village when this happens. I know I said a lot. I got a lot on my mind. I'm listening a lot, because more and more, these are soul touching conversations that we are starting here, that have to be had in the community and listened in the community. And there has to be action associated with it. And there has to be places where we address some of the stuff you've seen the congressman and other people kind of talk about addressing. Dr. McGee, you touched about it too. Poverty is not something we are okay with. Black people are okay with. Let me just say that, and part of healthcare, Dr. McGee, that I love that you're doing, part of healthcare is transfer of wealth, and we can't get around it. We can't, bypass and say they okay being poor and I'm rich and extracting from the neighborhood. We can't be doing all of that. We have to move from these equity talks to action. And so I'm thinking more and more about it, and I love that, Nikki, Congressman, I love that we're making space for this conversation that you all started, 2 years ago? I don't know how long this has been going on. and I don't know if you all see it, it is moving forward into what are we going to do to protect our communities, protect our tribe, and advance the health and wellness of our communities. So thank you.
Well, Michelle Perez says, but African Americans are taught not to mention their inner feelings and thoughts. Is there a follow up to begin a is there a follow up to begin a is there a follow up to begin a report? Depression or anxiety can't be diagnosed in 30 minutes. Did anybody want to say anything to that before I go on? Because we roughly have just about 9.5 minutes left.
Nikki,
Go ahead.
I'll say it this way. My brothers, our family was split up, and my brothers went to school in Virginia. They went to grammar school in Virginia, and they went to a one-room school for grammar school in Virginia with a black teacher. And both of them have done extremely well, because there's a difference when you have a teacher that looks at you like when they look at you and they see their son, or they look at you and they see their daughter. And I'm not saying people who are heteroracial can't do that, but I'm just saying when you get the same kind of response from your teacher that you're getting from your mama, it's different. It's different. And I think that the point I'm trying to make here, and one of these days we'll have a conversation about that, because I really think that we have to call into question was integration even the right thing to even think about? Because we weren't ready to integrate. In order to integrate, you got to be clear about who and who you are. You integrate coffee and cream, but the coffee is still coffee and the cream is still cream. And they're going to bring their inherent chemical reactions when they come together, but it's not going to be the same as it was before neither of them was there. So all I'm trying to say is that we got to stop dancing around these conversations, and we need to deal with them head on, because we are the ones that have to do it. And I'll end by saying this, and Congressman Davis knows this better than anybody in this room. There used to be a time when we got ready to have elections that we could meet in the basement of one of the restaurants on the south side, or the fish place on the west side, or wherever, and we would sit there, because I was in one of those meetings when Fred Rice, when they said, okay, Fred, you're going to be the police chief. Okay, you're going to do this. The other one's going to do that. And the business community stood up. And when it was time to make sure there was money for these campaigns, because you can't run a campaign with no money, the business community could do that. We don't have that as much anymore. We don't have it. And as a result, we have an anemia. We have an economic anemia of our community that's causing an inappropriate growth of our community. And when I was driving that bus and I went through Little Korea, I went through China, I went through all the different neighborhoods, everybody made sure that dollar circulated right in that community, like it used to in Chatham, like it used to in some of the other places. And I'll stop, because this is where I am right now in my life. And whatever life God got for me to be here, Mike, bless you for what you're doing. But at some point, we need to let those kids see some of that stuff from Hidden Colors. Yeah. We need to let the children see some of these things and discuss, and not be afraid to discuss it, even if they're, because Mike or one of the other people say we change our conversation when white people are in the room.
Oh.
And so
how did we slip? Would you believe that there are fewer public school teachers in Chicago who are Black than there were when I was teaching?
I can believe it, Congressman. I wouldn't be a doctor if it wasn't for a Black male teacher I had.
Yeah.
Not to say that the white teachers
I go to schools
good jobs
all the time when I can. And I'm amazed when I go into all Black schools and there's a paucity of Black teachers. And sometimes I feel so bad for the teachers because they'll be saying, now we've got a guest. We've got Congressman Davis with us. And could you all make sure that you, and I'm saying, please just tell them up here. I'll take care of the order. I guarantee you they'll be listening. They'll be all right. You don't have to do anything other than, I mean, let me do it. and they'll be just fine. They will be I guarantee you they'll be okay. They'll be great. But it's just, how do we get to that point? I mean, I know people who were teachers that had taught 15, 20 years, and they've been struggling to earn a decent living compared to what they were earning when they were teaching in the public school system. But they lost their jobs, and they've never been able to get another comparable one yet. It is strange. It is unbelievable. But it is.
What it is.
So Doug, Tony, Pete, then Mike. Let's go. That's that comment list up. Doug, Tony, Pete, then Mike.
So
Doug, I know you've been trying to get in for a minute, so go ahead, Doug.
it's not that important. It's just in reference to Dr. McGee and the congressman. There was actually legislation that was passed about 20 years ago that's really put a damper on gun violence research because somebody tried to link it to gun control.
Yep. 100%.
And if we were able to appeal that amendment, it would make a big difference. Even the author thinks they went way too far. And that to support Dr. McGee, there are many different forms of gun violence, whether it's young man on young man, single shooter, and each of them deserves their own particular area of research and expertise. So I just want to acknowledge that and say there's work to be done. I wish I could do more.
Awesome. Dr. Hampton.
I just wanted to just comment on what Michelle Hudson Perez had mentioned. This idea of is there, the need to build rapport? And the answer is absolutely. In fact, I can't get patients to do anything that I want them to do based on my expertise if I don't build rapport. But I guarantee you, it's up to all of us, including the patient, to engage. But I think I put the bigger responsibility on the clinician, because when people are in pain, sometimes they don't even know they're in pain. When people are struggling, they don't know that they're struggling because they think they normalize it, right? So when we started asking questions, when I mentioned the blood pressure, patients come in for blood pressure, and we asked about social determinants of health. I just did this on Friday, and a patient came in who they just came in for their blood pressure. They seemed like they were in a good mood. But then I got to the question related to, have you been feeling depressed? And immediately she just started to bawl. And I asked her, well, why did that question upset you? Well, it's because she has a brother that's dying. And because of the relationship she has with her sisters, that brother, she doesn't have access to that brother. They've kind of blocked her off, right? So we had to, in that moment, talk about what are the things that she can do. And we talked about, let's write something for him. Let's control our controllables. Let's not focus on that. That you can communicate in other ways. But the point is, in that moment, I had to become a therapist. And I didn't do it in 30 minutes. It was a 15-minute appointment, and it still only lasted about 18 minutes. So we have to ask the question. And if you're asking questions that people need to be asked, that's going to build rapport because they understand that you actually care. So if they feel like I care, then they're going to lighten up and open up. And all the clinicians on the panel know those are questions we hate to ask on a Friday at 4:30, right? But we need to ask those questions. because if we don't ask those questions, we can't help people. So again, it can be done. You just have to be skilled as a clinician, how to ask questions and how do you quickly provide solutions. And as we talked about earlier, if we have resources, as Dr. Michael has suggested, then we can help them.
Awesome. Keith?
I totally agree with my colleague. I will say the challenge to further elaborate on Michelle's question is that we do have a group of providers now that are not as skilled as Dr. Hampton just mentioned. And so, you know, as you know, you may go into a practice and it might be, let's say 10 providers. Out of those providers, you might have really 3 that are really highly skilled that can get quickly to, because you might have a list of problems from heart failure to renal failure to diabetes, all this, but your major problem right now is the fact that you're depressed. And that depression will lead you not to take your diabetes medicine, not to follow up on your appointment, but it takes a really skilled provider to be able to pick up that my attention now, I'm gonna spend all of my 13 minutes. I'm exaggerating, y'all, but it feels like 13 minutes. I'm gonna spend my whole 13 minutes on trying to figure out what is the best way to keep you safe. Number one, are you going to hurt yourself in the immediate future? Do you have thoughts of hurting yourself? Do you have a plan to hurt yourself? And then if you don't have any of those, how can I get you the most expedited care possible? Acknowledging the fact of what Dr. McGee said, which is there's already a shortage in mental health providers. So it takes that skilled provider to be able to do this in a timely manner. Number one, pick up that depression or anxiety or PTSD is your major issue right now. Then to also have the skill set to be able to say, do you need help right now or do you need help or can this help wait? And then to have the skill to say, I'm going to utilize my resources and influence to get you that care expeditiously. Then lastly, I'm going to comment on Dr. Mason's point, which is that when we grew up, we actually had providers. Dr. Butler was my doctor growing up. We had Black police officers in my neighborhood that coached my little league team. That's why I tell my daughters have a different response to police than I do. Because my little league coaches were not all of them, but a lot of them were police officers and they were Black men. So I didn't have this sort of inherent fear or anxiety around police officers because I remember them showing up to my practices with their uniform on. So I don't know if we need to mandate that. Listen, if you are going to patrol my community, you have got to volunteer at a little league. We need to see you in a non-threatening way. And I get that you know police officers have lives and everything, but it actually protects your life when I see you as a person. I don't see you as somebody that's trying to harm me when you pull me over. Like that's just a recent thing that I'm feeling. So that's my comment.
All right. Okay. Mike McGee.
You don't have much time left. And keep it moving.
Who running this? Go ahead.
I mean, it's simple in terms of Ms. Perez's question. For me as an ER doc, I'm going to see that person when they're in that crisis. So I'm going to be able to better ascertain if they're having a psychotic break, depression, or anxiety. And oftentimes we're going to look at whoever else was there, what the EMS told us, what brought you there. I'm going to check some labs. I'm going to check and drugs, alcohol, because substance-induced mood disorder can come out of this. So we got more that's given to us for us to make that quick diagnosis. And it's usually within 5 to 10 minutes, we know what's going on with somebody when they present to an emergency department.
Outstanding. Well, we have met our time, and I know people hate to hear me say that. So really quickly, I just want to say some hey to some people who is here. So I want to say hey to LaQueen Battle, who is here with us. Of course, Sheila McKay is here. And Sheila, thank you. We see all of your comments and everything that you are saying. Patrice Thomas, who is here with us just as well. And Gwen, we are glad you made it home safely and then got back on because you are not going to miss your couch conversations. So I thank you so very much. As we always do, we're going to go around the table and we're going to have our until next Monday thoughts. We're going to have those until next Monday. Doug, I'm going to start with you as May Ross is chiming in saying that this time is of the essence. We don't have enough time. Doug, go right
So
ahead. You're until next Monday.
I said it last week. I'm going to say it again. I'm not uncomfortable with these conversations. I know Dr. Mason's speaking the truth. And I want to say that Dr. Mason, Dr. Moyes got me fired up. And it's led me to this position. When you buy something, ask yourself, who is this helping and who is this hurting? So when you're getting that bag of chips, or you're getting that processed meat, or other stuff that you're buying on the street, start to ask the question, and where's that money going?
All right, Doug. You know, I do want to put May Ross's comments on her comment on everybody's mind, and we can discuss it next week. She says time is of the essence, and usually we don't get the time, and then there's 3 months. There's 3 months before your next appointment, but by that time the damage is basically done. So just want to put that out there. We can talk about that on next Monday. Dr. Hampton, you're until next Monday.
You touched me, Brother Pete, when you talked about the police officer. I hadn't really thought about it, but it was a police officer that kind of changed my life, and it was Officer Barry Batson. In fact, he was honored when they honored him. I think they had honorary street dedicated to him near Garfield Park, because back in the day, I was a tennis player. I played for Lane Tech High School. I played for Columbus Park. And when they didn't have the money to have Columbus Park and Garfield Park, they combined our their tennis teams to make one at Garfield Park, which was a problem for the folk on the South Side who, really had the best team. But we became the best team because you bought the best players, and we would win the state, and then we would go to Ohio. But it was Barry Batson who was a police officer who volunteered his time to be my tennis coach. I later worked in his. He had a couple of Popeyes. I worked there, and did that before I went to college. So you're right, Pete. I never thought about it, but man, I didn't even look at a cop as a negative because I was hanging out with a cop. And what a great idea to have a cop. Maybe we can do it on their time and say, you know what, guys, your last 2 hours of your shift, you need to go to the Garfield Park and coach these kids, because it completely changes your perception of what a cop is. So I think that's a great idea. And those are the types of innovative ideas that we need to bring to our leaders, including ourselves and our congressmen, so that maybe those are the types of things we can do to bring that rapport, bringing that word back to from the cop to the community. So I love that idea, and I would wrap up with those comments.
Outstanding. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that there is a school car, and it's called the school car. There's a police officer that's assigned to every school. There needs to be a bridge of a relationship between the officer and the school, that he is just not sitting out in front of that school, and he's only called in when there's a crisis, when he's at a CPS school. But when they are sitting near a near a Catholic school, they actually go into the school and they integrate with the students because they welcome him in. So I just want to put that out there. And I know that it happens because I work every day with them. So there is a school car and there is assigned officers to those schools. We just need to make sure that we bridge a relationship between the two. Dr. Terry Mason, you're until next Monday.
With what Dr. McGee started this whole program off with is reminiscent of what my son told me as he started to work with young kids in Gary. And he asked me, he said, Daddy, how do kids spell love? And he said, Time. That's how they spell love. If you don't spend no time, ain't no love. And Mike, that's what you're doing. You're spending time. And it may be the only love that a lot of these kids get. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, my 6th grade science teacher was an African-American man who was brilliant. And I learned more from that guy. I didn't learn anything new in science till I got to college biology at Loyola University from 6th grade, because he had a class, because he loved the students, that met an hour before school and we came. So you just keep doing that. You don't know what that investment of time is doing, but it's really, anybody else out here. You don't need to go buy your kids every new toy, every latest phone, no, they need time. And the last thing I'll say about that is when I was in practice, my staff was always mad with me because I was always running an hour, 2 hours late. And the reason was because in that exam room with those men, particularly those men I was dealing with erectile dysfunction, that's the only time they ever had a chance to talk about what was really bothering them. And I listened, and I let them cry, and I let them do whatever they needed to provide a safe space for them. And that's the one thing I miss about not being in private practice today.
Outstanding. Two quick comments I've got to read that I just received. One is from a police commander who says, I watch Couch Conversations all the time, but Nikki, please read my comments. Tell parents to stop telling their children, when you do something wrong, I'm going to call the police, or they bring them to the police. That makes children look at us in a bad light. So please make that public. And also to a retired police officer, retired detective who texted, he said, Nick, please tell the congressman that I said hello. As you know, I've always been community bound. I've always been a part of the community, so much until I adopted 10 children once I retired from the police department. And the congressman, and I want to thank you for always giving me an award for doing what I thought was the right thing to do, and that was to give some young men a home. So thank you so much. Dr. P, you're until next Monday.
So recently I had to go to the DMV, and when I tell you it was an experience, but I had to utilize some skills that I had to quickly get what I needed to get out of that DMV. And one of those skills is building rapport with people quickly, right? Because them people be trying to get you out of their face real quick, okay? And so I think no matter what profession you're in, if you're a police officer, if you're a nurse, if you're a provider, if you're a doctor or whatever, we've got to take every opportunity we can to build rapport with people, because we're all in our own way, we're providing care for somebody. And so if we remember, this person that I'm interacting with is a person. And so I might be a provider, you might be a police officer, you might be the guy that's serving Popeye's chicken, or okay, Terry, a salad someplace. Okay. So the point is, let's build rapport so we can help each other. But if I don't think you care about me, or if I don't think you acknowledge me, you're just rehashing all these past traumas that's happened. Maybe the trauma happened 10 minutes before I met you, or 10 years before I met you. But the point is, we have an opportunity to establish rapport, treat people like we're human. And I think if we do that, we can quell some of the things that we're seeing out here. But definitely we got to think creatively around what our usual community structures are, and maybe say, you like Dr. Hammond, to your point, the last hour of your shift, you're going to go work with Dr. McGee in the ER, and you're not going to be a police officer. You're going to be Dr. McGee helper for an hour, okay? And you're going to find out that these people that he's seeing, they're just like my nephew. They're just like my family member. And so when you put back on the uniform, treat them like you were Dr. McGee helper again.
Right.
Outstanding, outstanding. Dr. Maya Green, Miss 100, you're until next Monday.
Until next Monday. Part of what I want to remind everybody, we don't want to get away from, with the pandemic happening, a lot of the mental health stuff already existed. The pandemic definitely made it, escalated it. And this is not new this time. There's a book called Pandemics from Athens to AIDS. I think that's, Pandemics from Athens to AIDS. Check it out. It talks about, the underlying things that percolate in the community increased during this time. And some of the things that COVID mirrored, meaning anytime the pathogen is super tiny and we don't find a cure to it, and there's some confusion about how you get it, how you don't get it, all this other stuff. And then there's an isolation period. Those are some of the hot spots for pandemics all the way BC, that end, well, not end, that include violence. The last one we saw, we see a lot of them in Chicago, but one of the more notable ones was the flu. Is it 1918? 1918, yeah. The 1918 flu. At the end of it, we had something called the Red Summer. And a lot of times it's violence that ends in loss of a particular cultural group. The Red Summer was African Americans. And so when they say, scriptures like there's nothing new under the sun, things like that, we a lot of times have to look at not only our history, and we don't want to get stuck in history. We want to know our history. We want to know our history because there are pieces of our history. Dr. Mason talked about kind of how detaching from history and things like that is in a lot of spaces is what people want you to do. There are pieces and nuggets in our history that can help us and, our tribe, all tribes, humans as a whole move forward. So check it out, Pandemics, AIDS to Athens. And that speaks to why we're seeing the increase in violence right now.
All right, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael McGee. You're until next Monday.
Simply, everyone out there, just pray for our youth.
Dr. Michael McGee, you're until next Monday.
Simply, for everyone out there, just pray for our youth.
He said
it. Okay, all right. As we always often tell you guys to just do a couple things. One, COVID is still real and the numbers are rising. Even though they're still very low, COVID is still out here. Let's not get lackadaisical. Make sure you get your vaccine, get boosted, and get your second booster if it's time for you to do all of those things. Make sure you do those. Also, make sure you wear your mask. If you're in an area and you're just unsure, just put that mask on. And don't forget to wash your hands. And Dr. Maya usually gives us a little script on how those hands are supposed to be washed. Want to make sure that you do that when you wash your hands, and make sure that you wear that mask appropriately across your nose and mouth, making sure that it fits snug and tight. And as Dr. McGee always says, make sure you get that N95 mask. There you go, Pete. Pete is showing you how you're supposed to wear that mask. So make sure that you have your mask on. Stand up and mask up. If I've never told you guys before, guess what? I've got a whole lot of TIME for you. Isn't that what they say love is? I have a lot of TIME for all of you here. Take us home, Congressman.
Well, you never know what happened on a couch chat with the doctors. Dr. Hampton, you and I have just become even closer. You mentioned Barry Batson, that is Officer Barry Batson. He and Leroy Grant, Lieutenant Leroy Grant, we all worked together 40 years ago in something called Operation Bootstrap. One of the main leaders of it was Commander George Sims, who was a cocky police officer that everybody loved. And I really wish we still had Pat Hill, Howard Saffold, and that whole group of guys who, Julian Daggett, who formed the Afro Patrolmen's League. Unfortunately, we don't have an Afro Patrolmen's League. And the way that naming that you mentioned, Barry's wife called me maybe about 2 years before we did it. And she said, people are just beating up on policemen and saying how terrible they were. And my husband, Barry was a nice man. and there ought to be some way that we could recognize what he did. Not only did he do you and know you, but he also was very instrumental in the life of Katrina Adams, who became one of the top 10 female tennis players in the world. And she ended up being the head of the U.S. Tennis Association and was the first active player who ever did that in the history of the Tennis Association. Of course, she was a superstar at Northwestern and really put Northwestern, and she too came out of the same community where you must have lived. And so it is, and I went to Jason Irwin, Alderman Jason Irwin, and said, Jason, we ought to be able to find some way to name something around here after Barry Batson. And of course, Jason said, okay, because he knew the Adams and all of that and knew Barry. And so it just warms my heart to hear this information and to know that there were these individuals and people who collaborated in so many different ways to make things happen. And without the collaboration, quite honestly, they never will. I mean, some of the groups and people who existed, and it seems like we've lost, it reminds me of the song these guys used to sing. It say, you never close your eyes anymore when I kiss your lips. No tenderness do I feel in your fingertips. You're trying hard not to show it. But baby, you've lost that loving feeling. The Righteous Brothers. Now it's gone, gone, gone. And it seems to me that some of that perhaps has been lost in terms of the idea of hope and possibility that there can be restoration. One of the fears that I have is that for the first time, as I can recall in my analysis, this might be one of the first times that we can't really project that the quality of life for many children growing up right now will not be as good as that of their parents and grandparents. We've always been a futuristic people. We've got to believe that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday. We have to believe it. We can't let go of it. So until next Monday, I'll just simply say, hold on. Hold on. And keep moving onward and upward. And thank you all for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. It's helped.
Until next Monday, see you guys later. Same bad time, same bad channel. Onward and upward. Hold on until we give you more instructions next week.
All right.